Hey guys, Aaron Farmer here with the My Sugar-Free Journey podcast, and we are here today with Dr. Josef Arnould, a fantastic new guest that you guys are going to enjoy. I'm showing you a picture of his new book right now, The American Diet Revolution. Great book. I actually just finished it last night. Lots of fantastic information. I think you guys are going to enjoy what he's all about this morning. So let's talk to Dr. Arnould. Dr. Arnould, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Aaron. It's very nice to be here. Privilege, in fact.
And you asked me to call you Joe, and I blew it. That's the first thing out of my mouth. So I apologize about that. Let's talk about your background. Tell us, how you got into this and what it is that you're trying to accomplish.
Sure. Okay. Well, first of all, I'm a doctor of chiropractic. And about 30 years ago, after being in practice 6 or 7 years, I was not content with the degree to which my chiropractic patients were succeeding in their exercise programs, if they were exercising at all. Even though I would take them to the gym, show them exercises, write out exercises for them, either they would never stop after a month, or they would injure themselves while they're doing it. So I decided that I had to start my own clinical exercise program as a parallel to my chiropractic practice. And that program is called the Strength for Life Health and Fitness Center. So what I tried to accomplish there was to make strength training in particular, and exercise in general, to be forms of healthcare. And looking buff is great, but my goal was to help people, to enable people to do the physical things in life that we have to do, like in New England, it's shovel snow, or that we like to do, like play tennis or garden or golf or hike or mountain climb, whatever that is. So that's why I started the Strength for Life program. Now, as it developed, I also ran across the challenge that a lot of my patients were gaining weight very slowly. Each year, maybe a few pounds here, a few pounds there. But over the decades, as I continued in practice, this became 5 pounds, 10 pounds, 20 pounds. And so I said, I've got to do something to help with that as well, because my patients were confused. So what I started to do, Aaron, was to give my patients a 1-week nutritional diary. And what I asked them to do is just write down everything they would eat for a week. And then we would meet and we would talk about it, and I would try to help them. But it became very clear to me that one of the big problems was that people are very confused by conflicting nutritional advice.
Right.
So eventually, over the years, I tried to clear up that confusion. And I would explain to people, this advice. For instance, the food pyramid of 1992, which all of us are familiar with, U.S. Department of Agriculture promulgated that pyramid, and it was very confusing to people. And as a matter of fact, in the diaries, what I kept of people, anybody who followed the food pyramid gained weight. Now, I want to give you just a startling statistic.
Okay.
The average American between the ages of 25 and 55 loses about 0.5 pound of muscle a year. And in that same period, 30 years, they gain approximately 1.5 pounds of body fat. Now, on the scale, it says, well, we weigh 1 pound more this year. That doesn't sound bad. But if you take that over the 30-year span, it means a person has lost about 15 pounds of muscle and bone and gained about 45 pounds of fat. Now, I know from studying your history how detrimental that could be and how difficult that is. So coupling those two things together, that people were confused and people were gaining weight, it inspired me to, instead of explaining to every patient what needed to be done, I decided to write a book and to guide people through the difficulties in understanding nutritional information. One year we're told coffee's bad, the next year coffee's great. One year we're told eggs are bad, the next year eggs are in. One year we're told oatmeal is good, the next year it's not. So I had to do a lot of research in order to make sure that I was giving people good advice. So that was the inspiration for writing American Diet Revolution.
Well, let's talk about the research you did, because that's the difficult thing, because you're kind of indoctrinated by, everything that to eat one way, and you and I are advocating a completely different way to eat, that 15 helpings of grains are not the best thing to eat, that you should eat saturated fat, that you should eat probably more red meat. And that's a big, I mean, sometimes that's a big jump to take. What was your first clue that maybe, I know that you mentioned the food diaries, but what was, I guess, your first piece of confirming evidence that that the food pyramid was not the way to go?
All right. It's a great question, Aaron. And excuse me if it takes me a few minutes to explain my response to that. As I researched for this book, again, my original goal was just to try to present some clear-cut guidelines to help people eat more healthfully and to lose weight as they did, as their health improved. But the more books I read, the more angry I became. The first book that it was most influential for me was a book called Gut and Psychology Syndrome by a British child's neurologist named Natasha Campbell McBride. And in which that book, she said in 2004 that every child with autism, she specializes in treating kids with autism, has what's called gut dysbiosis, abnormal bacteria in their gut. Now, that doesn't identify all the other parameters in which children with autism are having difficulty, but that's one parameter. So I knew early on that something was really wrong. And as I read more and more books of the 21st century, what really struck me is how different the dietary advice in this century is from what we were indoctrinated with in the 20th century. In other words, we were told, drink skim milk, cut out butter, cut out eggs, eat more grains. And all of that, my diaries that I was taking from people, and that's in this century, showed that they were eating as though they were still following the food pyramid. Mm-hmm. And then I read a book, which I know that you've read too, and you've cited it at your site, and that's called The Big Fat Surprise by Nina Teicholz. And when I read that book, fireworks went off in my soul. I said, this is an outrage.
Yep.
Before I was upset. Now I'm angry. And I said, what she does in there is so stupendous, because she goes back all the way to the 1950s and she documents how the research was falsified. The information that we were given in the 20th century was corrupt, and it was based upon economic incentives of various groups, not upon the health of human beings as individuals. A good example of that would be that the grains, which had been altered to have higher concentrations of gluten and protein and other substances, were never tested on human beings. In other words, the guidelines we were given in the 20th century were based upon what was good for big agriculture, not upon what was good for human beings. So we were giving advice that was really without any substantiation. So
Right.
What Nina Teicholz does in The Big Fat Surprise, she goes back to those studies and shows how the authors of these studies actually manipulated the data to meet their own ideas rather than to present honest nutritional research. Well, Fortunately, in the 21st century, there are a whole host of new authors who are honest researchers who have said, that is bogus. We are going to use the scientific method, not economics, to determine what good nutritional advice is.
Right.
And those authors are the ones who started this, what I call the movement toward eating more healthfully.
Fantastic. You know, you're hitting on some things that that I went through as well. In fact, it was her book more than any other one, except for maybe Gary Taubes, that really caused me to see this. It's kind of the farce that it was. And I don't like to talk about conspiracy theories because it makes you sound like a nut. But when the government organization that's responsible for promoting the American farmer that's growing a lot of wheat, soy, and corn puts out, this suggestion, this food plate, this food pyramid that tells you to eat a lot of soy, corn, and wheat. It's hard not to look at that and say, okay, we were intentionally misled for financial reasons, and this came from the very highest levels of our government, and it was done on purpose. And so I don't talk about that too much because it makes you sound crazy, but it sure looks like that's exactly what happened.
Well, I'm like you, Aaron. I'm not sure it's a conspiracy, but what I group the people who benefited from this as are exploiters.
Yep.
They exploited an economic opportunity. Now, whether or not they conspired to create this, I'm not sure. But I know that in the end, we are the unfortunate victims of a very cruel nutritional experiment, which was a complete failure.
Yeah,
I'm sure you know the statistics because Nina Teicholz gives them to us. 1961, the rate of diabetes in the United States was less than 1%. Mm-hmm. 2001, it was 11%. 1961, the rate of obesity in the United States was 14%. 2001, 33%. It's now about 37%. Yeah. So clearly the statistics don't lie in that regard, because that's the exact era where we Americans followed the advice that we were given, and we trusted that it was. So one of the things that I really want to encourage people to do, Aaron, is to no longer accept information blindfolded, no longer be a passive acceptor, but instead become an active questioner of everything. Use your intellect and your reading capability to get information and make some decisions for yourself. Don't let the government or some advertisement make your decisions for you.
Exactly. So the next step, once you start reading through all this, the next step, and I've talked to so many doctors that talk about this kind of being the big thing. When did you take that next step to go from, okay, everything I've learned about nutrition at this point is probably wrong, we need to do it this way, to actually telling your clients that this was your new recommendation for how for how they should eat, and how did that go over with your clients?
Well, first of all, this was an evolving process for me as well, Aaron. It's not like I suddenly made a shift. As I mentioned in the book, even from the time I was in high school in the 1960s, I was reading about nutrition. I was just fooled by a lot of the misinformation. So gradually I began. You mentioned Gary Taubes. Okay. He wrote the article, what if it's been a big fat lie? I think it was 2001. So I was already thinking in those terms. It's just that gradually, as I accumulated more information, I transferred that information to my patients and to my trainees in my fitness department. So it wasn't like overnight there was a switch. It was just a gradual accumulation of knowledge. But it was Nina Teicholz who created the outrage, because then I realized that there was so much corruption behind the information we were given. And I'm like you. I don't want to talk about conspiracy, but it's just so aggravating. And at the light bulb for me was, this isn't enough. What I'm doing is not enough. Talking to individual people, I've got to take this to the next level, because I think, as much as somebody like you is doing a great job of giving information to people and inspiring them to make changes, and I'm on the same team, we're only hitting about 20% of the population. That's what I would call a trend, okay? But we have to take this trend and make it a revolution. So we want to get 80% of the people not only understanding what they should eat, but in order to make a revolution, we have to get them to know why they should eat it, and even more, feel why they should eat it. The first American Revolution didn't start out as, we're going to secede from Great Britain. It started out as, we just want better rights because we're being exploited by the English crown. But as people got more and more excited and realized what was happening to them, the revolution grew up. And I think what Nina Teicholz and Gary Taubes and all those writers have done early in this century is give us the leader. They're the Thomas Jeffersons, the George Washingtons, the Ben Franklins. They've created that information. You and I are taking that information and making it more like a crusade. We're saying, hey, if we don't do something, it's not just that we're gaining weight. We are losing the freedom of good health. We are losing our personal independence. It's a much bigger topic than just, I want to lose 5, 10 pounds or 50 pounds or 100 pounds. It's, I am fighting for my health, for the health of my family, for the health of my neighbors, and for the health of our nation, and perhaps even for the health of our species.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I think that it's talking about the health of our nation. Whenever I read the statistics about what the obesity crisis is going to cost us in the next 10 years, the next 20 years, the next 50 years, for all of the energy and hand wringing that is put towards global warming, which I think is also something that we need to be concerned with. I don't think we're going to make it as a nation to the point where we really have to be concerned about, the globe warming up, because we'll be bankrupt, because we won't be able to afford, no one will be able to, we won't be able to afford to pay for anybody's, medical bills. It's pretty crazy. You were talking about statistics. There was an article that came out just in the last couple months that we finally crossed the 51% barrier of American adults over the age of 40. 51% of them are obese. So we've got more than half the adult population, the over 40 adult population that, are walking around on the road to type 2 diabetes, on the road to getting a toe amputated, on the road to, increased rates of cancer and increased rates, all the stuff that goes along with it. It's terrifying. It is absolutely terrifying. And no one is anywhere near as concerned about this obesity crisis. It doesn't have the energy. It doesn't have the passion behind it. I feel as some of the other, issues of our time. And I think it's a bigger deal. I think it's a bigger deal for America to get this handled and to get this taken care of, because in my view, the answer is actually really easy. I mean, it's just eat real food, and stay away from sugars, processed grains, polyunsaturated fats, omega-6 oils, and things like that, and eat real food. And you can fix a lot of the issues that we have coming down the pike, but that story is not getting out, and it's certainly not getting out from our government. So I'm right there with you, man. I'm totally on your side when it comes to that. So let's talk about your practice. You have a new patient that comes in. you're not, you're not familiar with them, that you just know that they have 50 pounds to lose or whatever. They're 50 years old. What does that look like? What does that process look like when you're taking them in? What is your plan? How are you making a plan for them, and what does their ongoing care look like?
Okay. Well, thank you for that question. I should start out by answering that by saying that I have two parallel practices. I have a chiropractic practice and I have a fitness practice. Now, somebody usually enters the chiropractic practice because they have some type of painful condition of their neck or their back or their ankle or their knee or their shoulder, etc. But I also have a fitness program called Strength for Life, which is for people who don't necessarily have an acute problem, but want to either improve their health, improve their strength, improve their flexibility, improve their balance. They may have they may have gained 50 pounds over the last 10 years. They may have had a stroke and they're having difficulty walking. They may be having balance issues. My average age person in the fitness department is 67. Our oldest trainee is 97. So that's why it's called Strength for Life, because that's the goal, is to be able to keep going as long as we can. So if a person comes in the chiropractic problem or department first, I address their painful condition. I don't directly go immediately into if they were having a weight problem or a problem like that. I don't go to that first because I want to solve their most immediate problem. However, in my fitness program, that initial assessment, we do a body composition test, and I get a measure, not of their gross weight, but how much of their body is lean mass, muscle, bone, organs, blood, and how much is fat. And then I evaluate, I discuss with them what their personal goals are. I don't tell people, say, you got to lose 100 pounds. I find out, what would you like to do? How can I help you? And most, a very high percentage of people say, well, I'd really like to lose about the 25 pounds I've gained in the last year or two. And that's not unusual, especially when, say, people retire and then all of a sudden their weight balloons. But I don't try to superimpose that on them. However, if their other health conditions are such that they're having some organic problems or some orthopedic problems with their ankles, their knees, or hips, we need to discuss that right away. So what I do is that body composition test. And just to give you round figures, a healthy male should be about 20% body fat or a little lower. Okay. A healthy female should be approximately 25% or a little lower. Now, a supreme athlete in either sex would be lower than that, but that's not the typical patient with whom I'm dealing. So we set a goal. If somebody does want to lose a weight, want to decrease their body fat, because we're not interested in just losing weight, because a lot of times people will gain muscle and bone as they exercise, but we also want to decrease their body fat. So then I usually do a remeasurement after about 3 months of training. And in that period, we work on how they're eating. And what I try to tell people is, don't try to do everything at once. You'll see in the book, there's a 2-page guideline of foods which I recommend that people incorporate in their diet, and then a list of foods and types of foods that they should gradually eliminate. But I don't tell people follow everything immediately. I look at what they are eating and I say, okay, let's see if we can make a little bit of a change here, because I think this is the most important food you're eating, which is causing you to have a digestive problem or to gain weight. And then I say, let's not just be negative about it. Let's be proactive about it. Let's think about some foods that might supply some nutrients that you're missing in your diet, such as a food rich in probiotics, such as sauerkraut. Most people say, sauerkraut. And then I say, yeah, but do you know you have 3.5 to 5 pounds of bacteria in your gut at any time? And that's your army. That's protecting you. Your life depends on that. And you need to replenish that and feed that army every day. So I just try to wean people, bring them along gradually, because I found that if I try to give them the North Beach diet or the East Beach diet or the Mediterranean diet or the Black Sea diet, they just get confused. They throw up their hands, or it's too much at one time.
Right. So
try to find out what they are eating and say, okay, let's work with that. Let's see how we can improve that little by little. And then, but the other thing, and this is very important, Aaron, I say, don't believe what I say. Don't just be a passive acceptor of information. I want you to read a book. I want you to read Nina Teicholz. I want you to read Nina Gedgadas. I want you to read Gary Taubes. Just choose one book and read it, because it's not enough for you to do what I say. I want you to know and feel that you know why you're changing your diet. Because when you do that, then it gets into your soul and your substance. And then you're a lot more likely to follow what your own conscience is telling you than just what I tell you. You'll forget what I tell you 2 weeks from now, 2 years from now. But if you're telling it to yourself, you're going to remember it.
Yeah, I love the idea that it's half logic and information, and it's half passion and emotion, and that there'll be days when your logic will fail, and you've got to rely on that passion that you've got to improve your health, and there'll be other days when you're just not feeling it, and you just do what you've always done, and what you've always done is eat a good diet, and both those ideas have to come into play. You can't just rely on someone else's information, because eventually, that'll run out. It's gotta come from inside. It's gotta be your own information, your own time that you spent educating yourself, and then your own passion for your own health. Both those things come into play. So I'm there with you. The strength training portion of your business, what do you do? You having them like do deadlifts or bench press, or have you got something else going on?
Well,
and what does that 97-year-old person bench press? That's what I want to know. What do they deadlift?
Well, he doesn't. Somebody his age is not using free weights.
Okay.
But what I do with each patient and with each trainee is, I find out. First, I assess what their personal health is. Whether some people have had a new knee, a new hip, a new shoulder. Some people have had 2 hips and 2 shoulders. Some people have had 2 heart attacks. So I have to design a program based on that individual. I never do anything group ways. The second thing I assess is what that person wants to achieve. Some people say, I'd really like to be able to keep doing my garden. I can't lift my wheelbarrow anymore. So I develop exercises to help them do those tasks. But the other thing is, I try to make a strength training program for everybody that I can, to be head to toe, to not ignore a lot of the muscles that often are ignored. Now, every strength training program should, increase the strength of your arms and legs and your abdominals and your back muscles. But there are a couple of groups, for instance, that I just want to give you an example, that are very often neglected, especially with adults. One of the things that people develop as we age, especially in their 50s and 60s, are some balance problems. What a lot of people don't realize is that 1/3 of the information that comes into our inner ear for balance comes from the nerve endings called proprioceptors embedded in the muscles and joints of our neck. So we have to do neck exercises. So guess what? I make everybody do neck exercises. Takes 2 minutes, but they're what I call tweener muscles, okay? The muscles that go between. Another good example are the muscles of the hips. I test everybody's muscles in various parameters of movement, and I find out where they're weak, and I say, look, your hip muscles are very weak. You can move your legs forward and backward, but you can't put your hip out to the side worth peanuts. Mm-hmm. I don't like peanuts. Anyway, so I say, look, we've got to do some remedial exercises to improve that. So hip muscles and neck muscles are two examples of exercises which are very often ignored. I mean, everybody wants the glamorous muscles, the biceps and the abdominals and the calves, for instance, but we need to get to the whole body. So I have a whole body approach to everybody. So even if somebody just wants to be a deadlifter, I say, hey, that's not good enough. You've got to do hip exercises. You have to do neck exercises. And you know what, Aaron? Once they start to feel it, they say, yeah, you're right. You know, I can deadlift more now that my neck is more flexible than I could before.
Right. So give us a case study or two, somebody that's gone through your program that has had some issues, repaired, fixed. Can you do that for us?
Sure. Obviously, without naming any names. I'll give you an example of the 97-year-old, okay?
Okay.
He's a retired heart surgeon, okay? He retired at 65, and then he went to art school and learned to paint, and he painted from the time he was 65 until he was about 90. Well, his wife passed away. He was living in Rhode Island, and he decided to move up here to Massachusetts to be closer to his family. His two daughters live in this area. So he decided that the best thing for him to do would be to go into assisted living. He didn't want to be a burden to his family. And he was, like I said, he was 91 at the time. He just happened to temporarily rent an apartment in the revitalized mill building in which my office is. So he, at that time, came into me with a neck problem. He didn't come in for fitness. He came in because he'd been having headaches and neck pain for 2 years. And he had seen a number of his colleagues and surgeons at famous hospitals. And so I examined him and I said, you know, you've got a neck problem. It's not just weakness in your neck. You've got some, what do we call in chiropractic, some subluxations. Now, Aaron, with a 91-year-old, you have to be very cautious. So when you do neck adjustments on a 2-year-old baby or a 91-year-old man, you're very cautious. So I did this very little conservative adjustments, just a few things for a few times, and he started to feel better. And I said, now the next step is you have to start to do neck exercises. I said, everybody in my office does neck exercises unless they're younger than 2 or older than 100, and you don't qualify. So he started to do neck exercises. And then he said, this is amazing. My neck feels fine. My headaches are gone just from these simple exercises. And I said, you know what? You don't even know how good you can feel. Why don't you consider starting our strength training program? So he did. He was 91 at the time. He's been with us now 6 years. He comes 7 days a week. He said, I wrote a book last year called Neck Strength for Life. And he wrote the foreword to it. And he said, you know, and I said, you just write whatever you want. And what he wrote in, he said, when I moved here, I was going to go into assisted living, but I feel so good and strong now. I don't need to go to assisted living. I can take care of myself. And he still is. So that's fantastic. One example.
All right. So just to wrap up, let's go through some kind of edge case foods and tell me your thoughts on them and whether or not you recommend.
I missed that.
Just let's go through some foods.
Yep.
Some classes of foods, and you just tell us, you know, what you tell your patients about them. So like fruit, coffee, meats, what is it that you're suggesting they do or don't do around these foods? Let's start with
Okay.
fruit.
Sure. Well, what I do as a general guideline, and this is in the book, I break foods into three larger categories. The first category are called what I call the essential foods, and those are the foods that we should try to incorporate in our diet every day. And then the section B are the foods which are good for us or okay, then we can eat in limited quantities, but we don't have to eat them, and we shouldn't just eat them exclusively. And then section C is what I call the toxins, and the foods that we should gradually try to eliminate from our diets as completely as possible. Now, in the section A, the foods, what I call the essential foods, I start out with what I think all of the 21st century honest nutritional researchers say we should do. We should eat ample supply of vegetables every day. They should be organic. We should eat some fresh vegetables every day. I say, let's keep it real simple. Eat a salad every day. Mm-hmm. And that's one thing I tell everybody. Let's just eat a salad every day, a raw vegetable salad. Now you can add a few fruits to it if you want to add some blueberries, et cetera, but just eat a vegetable salad of organic vegetables. Let me just say why organic. Now, a lot of people say, well, the reason to eat organic is so you don't get the toxins from the pesticides. And that's true. But there's another reason which is often forgotten. And that is when a vegetable crop is sprayed with Roundup or some other pesticide, it not only kills the insects and fungus and other things that can disrupt that plant, it also either diminishes or completely destroys the bacteria in those plants. Okay, it's like applying an antibiotic to the plants. So guess what? We don't get those probiotics, those beneficial bacteria, when we eat non-organic vegetables. That's written in another revolutionary book. It's not my original idea. I have to tell that's Gerard Mullen, an endocrinologist from Johns Hopkins, who wrote a book in 2016 called Gut Balance Revolution. Okay, so we got a couple other revolutionaries with us here, Aaron. Okay, so then another thing in terms of vegetables, besides a salad, you should try to eat at least 1 or 2 servings of cooked vegetables a day. Why? Because, such as in soups or broths, or steamed vegetables, steamed kale, because some vegetables are actually easier for us to assimilate, to take the nutrients from, when they are cooked lightly, like kale or spinach. And not all people are sensitive to it, but a lot of people, there's oxalic acid in it, which is destroyed after, a few minutes of steaming. And then the third category of vegetables which we should eat, and again, most nutritional researchers of the 21st century say, is fermented vegetables, of which sauerkraut is the easiest example. And again, because when you ferment a vegetable, you enrich that supply of microorganisms which are beneficial and essential for human health. Okay? So,
are you familiar with the Perfect Pickler?
I'm not.
You got to check it out. Perfectpickler.com. It's a little apparatus that you hook up to what do you call it? A mason jar. And you put the stuff for your sauerkraut, or you put the stuff like the shredded cabbage and the salt and everything for your sauerkraut. And all you have to do is just leave it on the counter, and it'll ferment and turn it into sauerkraut in like a week or two. It's pretty amazing.
Fantastic. Well, that's what you just said is why we need to have exchanges like this, Aaron. We learn from each other. And that's at the core of what I feel the revolution needs is learning. We have to read, we have to discuss, we have to think, we have to question, we can't just say, oh, I'll just follow somebody's guru's advice. Not even mine.
Right.
Please.
Well, let's talk about coffee. What are your views on coffee?
My view on coffee is that it's safe to consume in small quantities. A cup or two a day is fine. One of the things that the eminent neurologist and author of Grain Brain and Brain Maker, David Perlmutter, says is, and points out, is that there is fiber in coffee, which the beneficial bacteria in our gut love. In other words, it's called a prebiotic. So it's a food that our beneficial bacteria love to eat. So in small quantities. Now, then it gets into the question of, do you drink it black or do you drink it with some kind of sweetener? I think we should avoid sweeteners if possible. And then the other question is, do you use a creamer in it? Well, there are a lot of alternatives. We definitely don't want to use a synthetic creamer if we're drinking organic coffee. There's the bulletproof coffee, which advocates, blending up butter or ghee and coconut oil or MCT oil. They're a little more exotic, but there's nothing wrong with that. So coffee's okay, but again, it's in my section B. It's you don't absolutely need it, but I don't think it's detrimental to have limited quantities of it on a regular basis.
All right, what are your views on alcohol?
Alcohol is a questionable one. It's in my, I would say, in very limited quantities. I was just at a seminar this weekend, and whereas the presenter said that the best research now says that even a little bit can be detrimental to our health. I know that Nora Gedgaudas in her books advocates against alcohol. Some of the other authors say that a glass of wine is okay. I don't want to get people too focused on negatives. Now, I know a lot of people like to have a glass of wine a night or one, if they do. I'm not going to harp on that particular thing because I think there are more important things to be considered. However, if it's gets to be excessive, then I think you've got a really serious problem. So I would say in very limited quantities, alcohol is okay. I'm not a big advocate of it. I, sometimes have a glass or two in a week, but never more. So.
Okay. Well, Dr. Joe, I appreciate this interview. You've given us a lot of information. If my listeners would like to get a hold of you, get a hold of your book, which again, here, let me show you guys the American Diet Revolution. Fantastic book. Where can they do all of that?
Okay. The easiest way to reach me is my website is called strengthforlife.com. Strength for Life is a trademark, which I've had the U.S. Trademark office since 1998. So strengthforlife.com. You'll find a contact there if you want a specific email for that website. If you'd like to talk with me personally, or send me a personal email, I try to respond to those. So that's the easiest way to get a hold of me.
Okay. Fantastic. Guys, we're going to put links to all of that in the show notes, including a link to his book if you'd like to check that out. All right, Dr. Joe, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you, Aaron. It's been a true privilege, and I really enjoyed it. And I'd like to congratulate you on being such a fantastic example for people in our country.
Appreciate it. I appreciate that so much. All right, guys, hold on. We'll be right back with some more information.